Today I'm joined by Robin from Slow Source, who is bringing miso back to the UK. Robin, welcome.
Hi, Hadrian. Thank you for having me. It's great to chat. We're going to have fun. And I recognize we did so much in the preamble already, but all of the juicy content is still yet to come.
I've got a feeling we haven't squeezed all the juice from the lemon yet. So, my first question, Robin, what is miso?
Okay, so miso is it's the Japanese term for a fermented bean paste. Now that's not the entire story. No food ever is. But you'll be the most common understanding of it is a soybean-based ferment. You'll see it as either a red or a white miso on the shelf. You'll maybe be familiar with brands like Miso Tasty, brands like Yukata, these different brands. But we kind of in the UK view it as just like miso soup. That may be a miso aubergine if you're lucky. That's kind of what we know. But the underlying definition is much more obfuse and complicated. So within that sort of fermented soybean paste, it's not just a load of stuff thrown in the barrel. There's a lot more art behind it. And that involves, the inoculation of rice or soybeans with a specific mold culture. And then that moldy rice and beans, they are mixed with salt and lactobacillus bacteria, and they're packed into big wooden barrels, and they're allowed to ferment for months and months, maybe years and years, and they turn into this delicious and beautiful umami paste. So yeah, that is a very brief overview of what miso is, and I really hope that the Japanese embassy aren't listening right now because that is a butchering of the complexity of it.
Yeah, is that all really protected by Japanese Food Administration, how misos are made? And are you breaking any rules by making it over here in the UK?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, but no, essentially, there's not a strict definition of what a miso is. And it's interesting you raised that because there was a little bit of documentation within the Japanese Agricultural Society, basically the people who do organic sign-off, the equivalent of our soil association, to define what shoyu was. And shoyu isn't miso, but it's the equivalent of sort of a quote-unquote soy sauce. Um, and it's made in a similar fermentation process to miso. But that excluded a traditional type of Japanese shoyu, which had been being made for, 800 years, 1,000 years. So the strict definition didn't actually apply to all of them. So it was made much more generic, and then it was kind of like, it's not really applied. So it's not, culturally inappropriate. And generally, my vibe check is I just check in with the Japanese people who taught me how to make miso and how to make shoyu and say, is this okay? And they say yes. And I think it is. And we can go into it more because it's very much related to my study in Japan and when I studied whiskey and sake in Japan. And it's all tied together, as we both know. That's how food systems are.
It's not like cheddar or something that has to be made in a specific area.
It's not like designation of protected origin or anything like that. These might exist in Japan, but I'm not entirely familiar with it. It's much more of a European thing in general.
Yeah. When you were explaining what miso is, it sounds to me like it is a complex process. Is it really difficult to get the right flavor just from such a few ingredients?
I think it's difficult to get the flavor you want and what you're targeting for. Now,
Right.
the miso making process is actually remarkably simple when you look at it. Now, the koji making process, and koji is the engine of miso making, and that's the mold-based ferment that I initially talked about. So that's you take a grain or a legume or a substrate. We call it substrate. And that's cooked and then cooled and then inoculated with a very specific type of microbe. In general, That'll be a an Aspergillus oryzae or some member of the Aspergillus family. Could be Niger, could be Kauai. Yeah, there's lots of different types, but I digress. And then that initial inoculation, you have to incubate that substrate at around 30 degrees centigrade and about 80% humidity. Now, the reason you're incubating it is the same reason you would use a seed mat when you're growing seeds. You want this to penetrate and to grow and these microbes to stick out their roots effectively. Now, over the course of the first, 24, 12, 16 hours, depending on your process and your substrate, the koji will start to become exothermic. Now, when I say that, it means like it starts to kick out lots of heat. It starts to metabolize so fast and so voraciously that it produces heat. So then it becomes less about attempting to keep the substrate warm, and it becomes about trying to keep the substrate cold. And so then
Mm.
it's taken out and it's broken down and it's oxygenated and it's cooled effectively, and then it's incubated for a further 24 hours. Now, after that 24 hours, then it's ready to use, and you can use that as the engine to make your miso, to make your sake, to make your mirin, to make your dowanjang, whatever it is. But I suppose the question then becomes, like, why? Why bother doing this? And the reason is that during that growth process, the koji mold, the Aspergillus, it produces enzymes, and those enzymes are effectively a biological key to a lock. It breaks a big thing down into a small thing, and within the miso making sphere, those enzymes are lipase, amylase, and protease. Now, lipase breaks fats down into fatty acids, which are, it's like your butyric acid. It's things that makes like, um, Parmesan funky. Um, but then you've got things like amylase. Amylase breaks starches down into sugars. Sugars are then fermentable by yeast into alcohols. That's what sake makers are interested in. And then you have protease, which breaks down proteins into amino acids and glutamates. And that's what we're super interested in, because that's what makes that delicious umami flavor. That's what we're looking for in a miso, in a shoyu. Um, so within our practice, and so it's actually, if you've got this engine, right, you've made this engine and you combine it with a bulk of protein, wherever that comes from, say it's soybeans, say it's black beans, say it's legumes, it doesn't matter. It will break that protein down into umami compounds, and then it's delicious. So to answer your question, is it a specific, is it a complex process to try and get the flavor dialed in? You can make something delicious. Yes. Yeah, you can do that. Given you've done the precursory steps, you can make something delicious. Now, to make something really specific and really special, it's very difficult, because then you need to, all of those processes I talked about during the sort of mold growth, you need to dial those in by hour. You need to dial in that temperature by degree. You need to dial in that humidity by percentage. And the total growth, you need to work all of this out. Your mixing schedule, you need to work that out. You need to be very specific about the grain and legume quality you're using. You need to understand the grind size that you're using to get the specific texture that you're looking for in order to end with the final flavor and textural profile that you want. So, actually, I kind of view it like playing bass guitar. Playing bass guitar is actually fairly straightforward when you're just learning, and it will sound good. But to play bass guitar really well, the learning curve is like a brick wall. It's quite high. So yeah, that was a very long and overly wordy answer, but yeah, that's your answer. That's how difficult it is to make it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it definitely sounds complex. When you talk about all the processes and how precise they have to be, is that something that, like, could you give me a recipe and you say, okay, it's got to be this temperature for this many minutes, or would I butcher it? Is it got to be something that you learn from experience and you get a feel for?
In my book, The Science of Fermentation. which is available at all good bookstores and probably your bad ones too.
I
Um,
need a copy of that. That looks incredible.
it's a really good book, but in it I
Has it
talk
got
about
pictures and diagrams?
yeah, it's
Oh
got all
yeah.
the stuff.
Yeah, I'm here for that.
Um, but in that I give a very sort of specific sort of standard operating procedure. We could say it that way.
Mm.
For koji. That's the koji page. And it sort of explains how to do it, how the science works within it, and it sort of breaks down a basic procedure. Now, um, as long as you follow that basic procedure or another basic procedure wherever you find it, I would recommend the Sake Brewer's textbook from the Brewing Society of Japan. That's my core text, but then you also have books like Koji Alchemy. My point being, if you follow these parameters, it's very hard for things to go wrong. Things will just go right. Now, if before you're experienced, before you know what you're doing, you try to diverge from that, you'll get things going wrong. Now, whether or not that's pathogenic, whether or not that will actually hurt you, is very much dependent on what you do wrong. But it's one of these things that actually it's very straightforward if you just follow the standard operational procedures. It's remarkably difficult if you try to do it on just vibes. You know what I mean? That's kind of how it is. So if you were to try and make it yourself, um, yeah, follow the rules. It's easy. Try to do it on vibes. It's very hard, and you won't get good results.
Right. In the beginning, but over time, presumably, because I think Japanese sushi chefs, they have to train for 2 years or five, maybe even 5 years just doing the rice, isn't it? So um, at some point, I guess you notice when is the right end to a stage and time to move on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You do get the feel for it, and it's actually interesting. You brought up that sort of sushi chefs having to train to wash rice, which I think is a bit over the top and a bit overblown. I don't think that happens so much, other than like really formal places. I think it's very important you learn and practice the base procedures before you start branching out. But then you do get a vibe for it, even though I said vibes based is bad. You do get a feel for it. And then
Yeah.
once you've got that feel for it and you kind of understand it and you understand how to record your processes, how to understand your processes, then you could start to branch out and do things a bit differently.
Yeah. Okay. That's when you get into vibe cooking. I kind of like the idea of
Yeah.
the concept of that. From an outsider's point of view, mine, it sounds like you're rotting rice or whatever else base you're using to get some koji. That is something we've been told not to do, surely. Like reheating rice just is meant to kill you on the spot. So that seems crazy that someone even came up with this idea, yet alone it's used to make this common ingredient. I mean, not common, but it's out there.
Okay, so this is a very interesting thing because I think it was Brian Savarin. I can't remember specifically, but a wonderful food theorist, philosopher talked about the idea of um, rotten and raw and cooked, and this triangle of where food lies and where we think food is acceptable. And our concept of food in this kind of process in Western food dogma is very much this is rot. This is not food we can eat. This is bad. And we're fearful of it. And I think this is particularly interesting. And I went through the same process. That's how I felt initially. Um, so the reason I first started and became interested in koji and mold and all of this type of ferment was when I lived in Japan, and we talked about this briefly. I think it was before we started recording. But I studied whiskey. That was my main modus operandi was to study a comparison between Japanese whiskey and Scottish whiskey. But as part of that research, I thought it was very important to learn about Japanese domestic alcohols. And sake, actually, sake it is a Japanese domestic alcohol. Oof, it's called Nihonshu, which means like Japanese booze, essentially. Now I basically was like, I need to learn about this stuff. So I went around the corner of where I lived in Kyoto, and because there just happened to be a brewery there, and knocked on the door, and I was like, okay, cool. Who's the boss? Can I have a look around? And the guy was like, I'm the boss. Who the hell are you? Why are you at my door? Um, and I was like, I'm just this weird Scottish guy who wants to learn about stuff. You gonna teach me? And he was like, uh, you don't seem like a business threat, so I guess so. And he took me in, showed me around. Ostensibly, it looked like a just any microbrewery, big wash clean floors, those floor drains, loads of guys wearing overalls and white wellies, that kind of thing. But then he was like, "Do you want to see the koji mura?" And I was like, "Oh wow, what's this? I've never heard this word before." So he took me upstairs, and it was basically like cracked open this like massive like submarine refrigerator door, and then it looked like a sauna. It was a wooden clad room, cedar wooden clad room. And I was hit with this like intense, humid, warm smell of chestnuts and vanilla and all of these sweet, delicious flavors or aromas. And trays, wooden trays and trays and trays of moldy rice. And and I was like, immediately, oh my God, you've left rice in a hot, humid, warm environment for 2 days. You are going to die. What are you doing? This is absolute insanity. And thankfully, the owner was like, okay, cool. Let me explain this to you. Okay. You, you idiot Scottish man. And we went to the tap room and he basically taught me through it. And he was like, okay, cool. With safe process and safe procedure, this will not lead to Bacillus cereus. And Bacillus cereus is a resistant spore-forming bacteria which can live in cooked grains because it takes an enormously high temperature to completely kill it off because it forms these little sort of eggshells which are hard to break through. And then if it lives for long enough, it produces enterotoxin. That enterotoxin can't be denatured unless you're like rocking north of like 350 degrees, like crazy temperatures. So then that's what causes poisoning. So he explained to me that by inoculating with this specific culture or by using a fermentation process that is similar to this, any kind of mold fermentation, these microbes completely dominate the substrate. So they dominate the rice. They completely take it over. So it means that any of these other pathogenic microbes can't get space to grow. They can't be there. It's sort of like the safest you can leave your house is when you're on holiday, is by inviting good guests in. If you've got good guests in, you don't get burglars. That was so stereotypically Scottish that I can't pronounce that word. Robbers can't get to your house. Because you've got people there already. It's just like if you introduce the correct microbe, you do not get pathogenic growth. Um, and then it serves as the basis for all of these different foods, like soy sauce, like shoyu, like shochu, like dobanjang, like gochujang. And the amazing thing is, whilst again in Western food dogma, we're so scared of the concept of mold, the most popular condiment by continent is soy sauce. By country, the most popular condiment in most countries in the world is soy sauce. So we are consistently and always eating soy sauce, a product based on mold, which we are completely comfortable with, and we don't know it. So it's one of these things where we are actually eating this stuff all of the time and we're not scared of it. But then as soon as you see how it's made, people are scared. And the same goes for even something local to here, like Worcestershire sauce. That's actually a whole barrel of moldy fish, of rotting fish, as people would view it. It's actually fish undergoing a proteolysis enzymatic breakdown, but we don't need to specify that. And if people saw that and understood, they'd be horrified because people are, if we, people are very much shielded from what food actually is and how it's actually made, and people are very scared of it as a result of that. So again, that's a very long-winded answer to why it's safe and why we're scared of it.
Okay, but it does sound like that there is a bacteria that you could get on rice that would be dangerous, the one that's in kind of eggshell sort of protection. Yeah, okay. That's important to get that right. It's
Yeah,
funny actually,
Bacillus cereus. It
right.
is. It's not a nice pathogen, and it is very serious. It's incredibly rare, but if you look after food and you put it in the right conditions, it's not a risk whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen, or I've got a book on my book list that I want to read called Humanera.
Mhm.
And I think the concept is about using human shit as fertilizer. And
Yep.
there's this idea that we extract as much nutrition from the ground as possible into our food, and then we eat it, we digest it, and it goes into the sewage system, and then we throw that sewage system nowhere near anywhere that it's going to go back into the food system. So we're kind of extracting all this goodness and nutrition and then putting it away somewhere. And I feel like we've been given this or sold this story that it's all really bad for you. Any food that's at all moldy must be bad for you. But I kind of wonder if it certainly sounds from what you're saying that it's actually more complex than that, and there might be good and bad bacteria, or maybe certainly there's a good element that we should probably be investigating, and maybe it's even crucial to our health at the same time as well.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the thing is, you're bang on the money. Like the thing is, stuff is way more complicated. It's always way more complicated, and we're kind of taught to believe that simple is better. And it's not. It's just not it's not a reflection of reality. Reality, sadly, doesn't care about us, and it is complex. And our systems that are currently in place want us to believe that things are simple, and they're not. They're obfuse and they're nuanced and they're different and they're amazing and they're beautiful. Now, with reference to sort of all of this good nutrition that's actually being lost, it's being wasted through human waste. Now, human manure is actually quite a difficult one because of E. coli. Because human waste can contain E. coli. If it's used directly as manure, the E. coli can come through into our crops, which is not great. However, you can put it through processes that does make it safe, and it means that that nutrition is captured. I'm not fully articulate on this topic. I think um, people who specialize in mycelium, people who specialize in farming will know more about this than I. But the point is, it can be captured. We can do that with the system. And one of the massive problems we face is, yeah, we are ripping out all of this stuff from the soil, all of these nutrients, all of this stuff, and we're putting it into crops that then go into contaminated landfill that can't be used anymore. We're effectively destroying that nutrient content. Obviously, it's still there, and obviously, it can undergo some kind of recovery process, but that recovery process again costs energy and effort, and systems need to be built to do it. Um, so we are kind of wasting that stream. We're wasting the stream of nutrients and energy.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I hope that things are going to change now. I mean, I'm very interested in regenerative farming at the moment, and I think the idea that we have to pile a whole bunch of fertilizer onto the soil to make things work. Just there's so many question marks over that, and particularly from a politics point of view, because I think the companies that supply those chemicals, they have so much power over the farmers that you're really taking away the essence of what food is, and also maybe at the same time destroying any nutritional value. So yeah, that's it's a subject that I feel very passionate about. So you're there in Kyoto, and that reminds me of I, I was in Kyoto many years ago, and I was desperate for somewhere to eat, so I run into this place. And you know, most Japanese places you get the plastic models outside. This one didn't have that. There was no indication of what kind of a restaurant it was or anything in English, and no phone reception. So I pointed to something on the menu, and after eating it, I was a bit shocked at some of the stuff coming out. And when I took a photo of the menu and translated it later, and it turned out I'd ordered a dish called Chicken Eight Ways, and there was raw chicken hearts, there was chicken cartilage salad. So I basically chowed down through this entire thing, some of it was incredible, and it was an experience, but I probably wouldn't order it again. Anyway, that was my Kyoto experience. But so you're there in Kyoto, and you somehow managed to get in to see the whole process of the Koji hot room and how they're making magical products. But what was it that drew you to think, oh, I want to get involved in this now? Because it sounds like you weren't doing it before.
Initially, way back in the day, I studied chemistry and biology. And the reason I studied this was I wanted to understand science. I wanted to understand how reality worked. That was my whole thing. But I studied a degree that was an industrial degree. And they were like, "Oh, see all your ideas about science philosophy? Throw that out. Here's how you build an oil pipeline." And I was like, "No, not so much for me. I'm not interested in that." And then I worked in all sorts of different jobs. I was a cocktail bartender. I was your regular bartender at folk music pub. I was the best fudge maker in the UK at one point. I launched a whiskey brand. I launched a hot sauce brand. I was a secretary and optometrist. I was a park ranger. I did animal vaccine modeling. I did a lot of weird stuff. But I always found that like working with and studying food was what I was predominantly interested in. 'Cause I felt it was real. Like when I worked with people in food, when I did working in street food, when I did worked as a cook, when I was a chef, um, that's what it was this space where people didn't bullshit, people didn't lie, people were just raw, and it was what I cared about because it was just like it's you and the person you're feeding and understanding how all of this links together. Because you know the guy who's delivering the fish the next morning. You know him. You know his name. You know who he's working with, and you essentially understand systems theory by working in food. Most chefs don't understand they're systems theorists by accident, but they totally are. And so I worked in that, but then I studied I found out about a master's degree in gastronomy, which is a formalized systems theory degree in food systems, in food. And I blagged my way on it because they didn't know that I hadn't finished my bachelor's degree and they didn't ask me and they can't take it away now. So there you go. And I convinced them to yeah, I convinced them to send me to write my thesis on a philosophical comparison of Japanese whiskey and Scottish whiskey. And
Amazing.
that's how I ended up in Japan to study all of these amazing things that led me to learn about koji. But yeah, that's how we ended up here.
So when you came back from Japan, did you think, okay, there's something to this miso and shoyu. I really want to make this into a product.
It's not sort of I immediately analyzed the gap in the market. You know, I didn't do like a product analysis or anything like that. It was mainly just following my interest because I've always found that the thing I take most meaning from and the thing I take most joy from is just following my interest. And the idea of this mold that underpins so much of our foods that we don't talk about is super interesting. And I followed that interest. So I continue to experiment with it. I continue to try and grow it, made it in its different forms, made, sake, dobroku, koji, miso, shoyu. But then I specifically went back to Japan in 2020 to try and learn about miso, to go to miso breweries. And then that was completely ruined by COVID. But then when I came home, I was like, oh, okay, cool. I better do something. So I made my sort of quote unquote food and flavor and fermentation lab called the Koji Kitchen. And I rented a space that was about half the size of a shipping container. It was an old first aid station in what used to be the National Potato Lab of the UK, where all of the potatoes were studied and saved. That was then subsequently broke up into a bunch of different businesses. But then I rented this, I set up that company, and I did development and product development for different companies, different restaurants. But yeah, that's how I went from studying and writing it into actually getting involved in it professionally. It was just following interest. It was
Yeah.
just following interest, and it led me from place to place to place. And after I set up this food and fermentation lab, then I set up the Fermenters Guild, which is a trade organization that looks after fermentation professionals. So your kombucha makers, your kefir makers, your kimchi guys, your sauerkraut guys, all of the weirdos of the food world. And it represents them academically and in legislation as well, or does it? We do our best to. Um, but then I was approached by Penguin and DK to write my book. So thankfully, as a result of that, from launching the Fermenters Guild, that meant I got to travel and learn so much from different and incredible practitioners. So then I became versed beyond Koji into lots of different aspects. And yeah, as a result of that, I was approached by Penguin and DK to write my first book, Science of Fermentation. Again, available in all good bookshops. I will. I'm contractually obliged to promote it, so I should and always will.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Because as
but
well, like,
then,
I mean, I guess I'm sure you're familiar with Tim Spector, and he's always telling us to eat more fermented food. So, do you, are you interested in the health side of what you're making, the miso and the shoyu? Do you believe it has a health benefit, or is that less important than the flavor? Because it sounds like it's an umami hit from what you said, and that's obviously got its own appeal.
yeah, very good question. And I did do a radio program where me and Big Tim were actually on it at the same time with Dan Saladino on the BBC food program. We used to Radio 4 food program. Um, and he talks a little bit about it, and I talk a little bit about it. But I always view, and I quote the words of Dr. Johnny Drain, which is lead with the tasty. Lead with the tasty, you know? Don't lead with microbial scaremongering or gut health promises. Just lead with the tasty. So human beings are effectively really complicated bioavailability detection machines. The whole reason we have this olfactory response is to tell us this isn't poison and this is going to be good for you. This is going to give you a high calorie and high nutritional load. It's going to give you that. So over time, we developed that, okay, cool. Breaking down proteins ourselves costs loads of energy. Breaking down starches, loads of energy. You know what's great? Employing microbes to do it for us. So let's build an organ that, and again, I'm saying let's build an organ. Obviously, I understand natural selection, and this is an evolutionary process that takes billions of years, but I digress. Let's build an organ that can contain this enormous colony of different microbes that will do that job for us. And all we need to do is have an olfactory response that says, yes, this is good stuff that we can put down, feed to them, and it's really easy for us to digest. So we evolved with that. We developed with that. But the point is that these things are delicious. They are delicious. So if you're eating delicious and real stuff, you're almost certainly eating good stuff. So when you break down a protein into a glutamate and a peptide, an amino acid, whatever, that gives you the umami response. That's what the umami response is. Because in our ancient history, what that was telling us is this is available protein. This is protein that's already been broken down, so we can digest it way easier. Let's tell this primate that that's tasty, so it eats more of it, and whatever it is that's giving that, do it more. Same as sugar, easily available. So if that's a starch that's been broken down into sugar, hell yeah, eat more of it. Um, and that means that fermented foods are one of these things that, yeah, of course, we've been eating these for a really long time because we're basically outsourcing our own gut to ex outside of ourselves. We're employing microbes to do the work of our body without us being there. It's really energy efficient, so that's why we do it. Now, the problem then becomes that in these traditional fermented foods, you're getting these microbes that we evolved with, so we want them, and they give us health benefits because they're our evolutionary partners. We're getting these broken down materials which are delicious but also easily available, which is, good. It means we don't have to put in more energy to do it. The problem becomes when we were able to isolate specific compounds, and able to understand how we can just, oh, this is the thing that makes the human think stuff is delicious. We can then take that and put it on stuff that is nutritionally bereft, and the human will still think it's delicious. So this is why MSG, which I am a massive advocate of MSG. I think MSG has got a massively bad rap because it's just a chemical, and chemicals are just chemicals. They're not bad. They're just their application can be bad. But then within the food industry, you can go, it's really advantageous to be able to go, okay, cool. We have a really cheap, nutritionally bereft food. How do we make people eat more of it? Let's hijack their olfactory response to make them think that this is going to give a massive nutritional benefit without it actually doing so. So, what we do is cover it in amino acids and peptides and don't give it the nutritional load that would actually happen if that had been a fermented food or a natural food. So, that's why if you put a bunch of MSG on anything, you can just put it on raw starch, it's fine. It's delicious. It is delicious. But you're getting nothing from it. Um, so I essentially to answer your question, I think fermentation it contributes to health and gut health, predominantly because it indicates to the human that we are eating something that is good for us. It's bioavailable, it's easy to digest, and also we are consuming microbes, these symbiotic partners that work with us and we have evolved with. So of course they need to be as part of us.
Yeah. I talk about it all the time, but one of my favorite books that I read recently was The Dorito Effect. Do you know the Mark Schatzker book?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it sounds like, I mean, you were basically describing that whole process of how they came up with the Dorito, basically shoving a whole bunch of flavor onto this thing with zero nutritional value. And I was talking to someone about uh, they were from a flavor house, and they were talking about how flavor companies capture flavor. And so, if you think about, you have some real food, and I think chocolate or coffee really fits into that category, where or even good whiskey, for instance, you taste it and you kind of get hit by an initial wave of flavor, and then you get another wave of flavor, which is different, and so on. And the kind of the more complex it is, the longer these flavors will go on. It could go on for minutes even. But what the flavor companies do is they recognize, because humans are only able to recognize three, four, maybe five absolute max different flavors at any one time. um, they replicate the three, four, or five flavors that come out the strongest from foods, and they just put that in the food. But a tomato, for instance, and you probably know this from Mark Schatzker, but a tomato can have 500 or 600 flavor compounds. So trying to get that into three or four flavors is obviously not the same. So what you were saying about, if you're led by taste, and I've forgotten that little haiku that you said about taste, but if you're led by that, it should lead
Dr.
you.
Johnny Drain's lead with the tasty. I will just beat that drum forever, but go on.
Yeah, but I actually think that's such a good way of thinking about it, because um, if you are led by that, then your body will tell you what it needs to eat. The only problem is when you're hijacked by eating a whole bunch of synthetic food, you won't actually know what real food tastes like.
Exactly, exactly. And the thing is, this is why I'm so defensive over MSG in general, which sounds kind of backwards, since I'm someone who is such an advocate of like organic food, real food, few ingredients. The reason I'm such an advocate for it is that it's a chemical phobia that is based on racism that has then been utilized by the food industry to absolve its own sins, which is insane to me. So, as I say, MSG naturally forming. You find it in Parmigiano Reggiano. You find it in sun-dried tomatoes. It was first even identified on kombu, on seaweed, and then it was isolated, and then we were able to make it through bioreactors, essentially a modified form of, I think it's lactobacillus that then converts sugars into MSG. And then one dude, wrote one opinion piece saying, "I think that everyone feels a bit bloated after Chinese food. It's because of MSG, because I don't really trust these Chinese restaurants." And this just it was like a zombie fact. It just kept getting repeated and repeated and repeated. And it has never been verified. Every single scientific paper that has ever discussed MSG has found that it's completely fine. If you do a side by side between Chinese food and Italian food in one study, where the Italian food is packed with MSG, the Chinese food has none. For some reason, it was said that the Chinese food had MSG in it by the participants, even though it didn't. And then when you scale up to industry, and it was actually MSG was actively being used in UPFs, ultra processed foods rather, then it became this amazingly useful thing that actually, you know what we can do? You know what we can do? We can use different glutamate and peptides that do the exact same thing and trigger the exact same umami response. But what we can do is create MSG as a bugbear. And we can say that this chemical, that's the bad guy. That's the one that is terrible for you. And if we don't have MSG in our food, then it's great. Even though they're using the exact same, well, similar amino acids and peptides to do the same thing. And the problem is that it's nutritionally bereft food. It's not the MSG, it's not that chemical, it's actually the industry as a whole, which is why I think understanding food systems are important. But anyway, yeah, sorry, that was a massive tangent, but still.
No, it's still fascinating though. And I think, am I right in thinking like konbu, you said MSG occurs on naturally, but is it soybeans as well? Does that have MSG on it naturally?
It doesn't occur naturally on soybeans, but as soon as you create miso and you break those proteins down, monosodium glutamate (MSG) will be produced. It will
Yeah.
be present. But naturally, naturally, everything's a natural system because we live in a natural world. That's just how the universe works. When you break down the proteins in soybeans, MSG will be produced just as part of that process.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you sound like the right person to ask this question to because you understand booze by the sounds of it and the health benefits of foods as well. So, is there a benefit of drinking booze? Because obviously it can be fermented, can be distilled, but is there a benefit?
Interesting question. Very interesting question. So there was a book written by a guy called Richard Wrangham, Dr. Richard Wrangham, who it's called Catching Fire. Um, not the not the pop culture Catching Fire, different book. But it's about how essentially human beings utilized cooking technology in order to maximize brain capacity because we were able to take a lot of nutrients out of food and turn them into energy really easy. Gave us more time to think, gave us more time to develop. um, and he also suggests that fermentation happened before that. And it goes on to a little bit, and Richard Wrangham didn't actually discuss the alcohol thing specifically, but he touched on it. It was proposed by an earlier academic whose name escapes me right now, but it's called the drunken monkey hypothesis, which is a bastardization of the stoned ape hypothesis. Stoned ape hypothesis is that early primates ate a bunch of hallucinogens and suddenly became really good at invention. Something I subscribe more to is the drunken monkey hypothesis, which is essentially when our ancestors, our pre-Homo sapien ancestors, came down, stopped being arboreal, became bipedal, one of the first food sources they would have found is decaying fruit. Decaying fruit has become inoculated with natural yeasts. Those natural yeasts create alcohol. So having a biological adaptation that allows you to break down alcohol is really advantageous to that to those early ancestors of ours. So we actually have a gene that allows us to break down alcohol, something mad like 400 times more effectively than any other primate. We're really good at it. We're really good at breaking down alcohol. And the drunken monkey hypothesis suggests that as a result of our capacity to consume and metabolize alcohol, it allowed us to utilize this as a tool to further creative and communal and social development, to allow us to become what we are today. Now, when it comes to today's health benefits, that becomes more difficult. But it's actually similar to the MSG conversation, because when alcohol was produced when we were evolving, you're talking about a maximum of like 1.5, 2% alcohol, like very low. And now it's very easily available to go down to any shop anywhere in the world and get access to 40% alcohol straight away without a problem. We are not evolutionarily equipped to deal with that. So there are going to be deleterious health effects attached to it, which causes all these problems like liver damage, Korsakoff syndrome, these issues. So, as with all things, it's more complicated. So there are many suggestions that low alcohol consumption is actually pretty good for you because we were evolved to do it. And the alcohol consumption we have in a post-industrial civilization is pretty dangerous because we just don't have the capability to deal with it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, they talk about elks getting caught in trees because they climbed up there looking for the rotten apples, don't they? So, yeah, maybe a little bit of what you fancy is okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of what it is. Like
Yeah.
we, the old adage of all things in moderation is actually kind of very well linked to um, doing the thing that we were kind of evolved to do for the most part. Like that, we have, whilst we were able to use invention to make aeroplanes and houses and frames and sake. We're kind of still tied to the biological chain, and we kind of just have to live within that. And we shouldn't push beyond that too far because we're not built to deal with it. So a little bit is good, I suspect.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we were talking about food systems. Is that something that you apply to the products that you make? Do you consider that when you're making something?
Absolutely. Like, it's very important to me. It's very important to me that I get the correct type of grain, correct type of oat to use in our for the misos that we make, for the shoyus that we make, because not only will they not really work if we don't use the correct ones, they won't be delicious, and we're not adhering to our core concept of let's localize this completely to things that grow here. So it's enormously important to me that we use we use grains that come from here. We use legumes that come from here. It's hugely important to me, not only because I think it makes everything we make tastes and give an actual terroir that represents what we're doing, and where we're making it. It also, gives back to the land that we're taking it from, because the peas that we get come from regenerative agriculture. The oats that we get are from oat fields that utilize what's the word I'm looking for? Heritage variety grains. So it's enormously important to me.
Yeah, yeah. And then does it go beyond the food and the ingredients? Do you get involved with farmers where you're sourcing food from? Do you look at the soil?
Um, with that, for me personally, no. I haven't actually met our farmers and our I haven't met our farmers quite yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Is it
because
something that interests you?
sorry, go on.
Do you think one day you'd like to do it?
Absolutely, but it's not my specialism.
Yeah.
I would always worry that it's going to be me um, looking at a bunch of fields and talking about weird flavor science, and a farmer being like, why is this man here wasting my time? Um, and I mainly interface with Hodmadods, actually, who are our primary supplier, and they do the interface with farmers. But it is something you know what, it's something I need to do. And whilst my company, Slow Sauce, has only really been in existence, well, in public existence for about a year, it's something I need to do, and I feel it's professionally reticent of me to not.
Well, I was just curious. There's no need to feel like you have to do it or anything. But I saw the documentary 6 Inches of Soil recently, And they show you they dig up some soil in a dead field, and it's basically like sand, and there's nothing going on. And then they dig up some soil from a regeneratively farmed field, and it's teeming with life, literally worms and insects and roots and mycelium. And they say, not only can you see and feel the difference, but you can smell the difference. And apparently, the dead soil will just have a really rank smell about it, whereas the living soil smells completely different. And I think it just makes complete sense that if you're growing food in a system that supports the soil rather than just treats the soil as something you can just extract from and extract and extract, then it's kind of you're looping the whole system and you're linking it to every aspect of our lives, like what we eat, what we put back, and so on in a cycle.
Yeah, I mean, the comparison of soils is a really good one because um, something we talked about when I was studying my master's was soil versus dirt. When does dirt become soil, and when does soil become dirt? And the idea is soil is living and dirt is not. Um, and there's when you smell a compost heap, a good, healthy compost heap, it doesn't smell like rot. Your body is not telling you that this is bad. Um, but when you smell soil that has had monocultured rot within it, so say soil that's had, 50 years of just potatoes being slammed into it, with with as much pesticide and as much fertilizer that it takes to make it happen. When you smell that soil when it's left fallow, it does not smell good. It smells bad. It doesn't smell like soil. But again, you take that stuff out the bottom of your compost heap, it smells good. So it's it's one of these things where, like, again, just be led by what the human is telling you, because we're quite good at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like I'm thinking whenever I ever come into contact with compost, but if I'm walking through a park or something, there's often a compost area there, and there's definitely an underlying sweetness to it. And it's not disgusting. It's certainly not chemical. So, yeah. I do want to know, I want to talk about your products very briefly and ask you which one is your favorite?
Oh, 100% the oat miso.
Okay.
I can definitely shoot from the hip on that one because it is my favorite. It's my baby. It is kind of the first one. Um,
How do you eat it, or how would you recommend eating it?
Miso soup for me. Like, I know we give so many other recommendations with, use it as a marinade, use it as a glaze, which is amazing, and it should do that because it brings in this deep, intense umami flavor. It brings in the flavor of oats, which we're not actually used to anymore. However, for me, it's a miso soup, and I do have some kind of miso soup every single day, which sounds like I'm towing the party line, which I'm totally not, because I'm more than happy to have other people's miso, but a miso soup every day. And I have oat miso, and just like, what is it, like 15 or 20 grams, just a tablespoon of miso in 200 milliliters of hot water, and a little bit of seaweed, whether that's dulse or wakame or whatever, and it's my favorite way. It's my favorite way to do it by like 100 miles, which is it's the most boring way. It's the least marketable way to say that I enjoy it, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got recipe suggestions on the website and there's just one and it's just, yeah, the miso, that's it.
Yeah.
Um, Temperature for the water. Do you limit yourself? Do you take it that carefully? You like under whatever it is?
Honestly, no. I'm doing this every day. And even when you speak to coffee nerds who, will always talk about, oh, it's a specific temperature, oh, it's a specific grind size. When you actually speak to them, they're just doing whatever it takes to get their coffee out in the morning. When I have miso soup for me every day, I'm just taking it at kettle temperature because I want my breakfast, man. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm doing. Um, but I mean, if you want the perfect product, the perfect recipe, you don't want to be taking it to fully boiling temperature because you are going to blast off aromatics. You want to be taking it like 80, 85 degrees. That's the actual ideal. But for the
Yeah.
most part, if you just want something delicious for a miso soup, it doesn't matter. It's going to be fine. As long as you're
Yeah.
not using like 500 degree steam and blasting it in and removing anything, you're going to be fine. It's going to be tasty.
Yeah. And where can I find it? Is it in shops or are you supplying mostly to like food service or restaurants or how does it work?
Right, well, we do direct to customer. So we sell online and you can get jars of our product, you can get bottles of our product through that. We also have a couple of wholesalers. If you're a retailer, you can get it through Organic North or you can get it through Hodmedod. Hodmedod also do a retail presence for us, so you can get that as a customer. And we have a selection of farm shops and delis throughout the country. Which is growing every single day. But we're not in any of the big multiples quite yet. We're not in Sainsbury's or Tesco or anything like that quite yet.
Okay. Yeah, there's a shop in Angel in North London called The Shope, which is like a Scottish deli, but I suspect it does things more like iron brew rather than oat miso. Just hazarding a guess.
I'm aware of them. Yeah, they
Okay.
haven't responded to us yet.
Right. I'll put in a word for you if I pass by then.
Please do.
Robin, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
No problem at all.